Good evening, and thank you for joining me on this Thursday evening, everybody. We're going to get to the weather very shortly, but real quick before we do that, let's do a couple housekeeping things. First of all, I just want to say thank you again for watching the video, and if this is your first time here, my name is Gerald. I'm a meteorology student at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and my passion is pretty much all things weather, and I hope that you enjoy the video, and if you do, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and leave a comment, tell me where you're watching from. I always like to see where the subscribers and viewers are joining me from. But let's go ahead and get right to the weather because we have a lot to talk about this evening. Let's start with the current watches and warnings issued by the National Weather Service throughout the country. This orange area here into the Dakotas, Iowa, Minnesota, and the lake effect areas of Michigan are blizzard warnings. This pink color here are winter storm warnings. And then we also have winter weather advisories in sections of New England. Another advisory here and warnings that are issued here in the northeastern part of the country are high wind warnings and high wind advisories. But the big story here are all of these wind chill watches and warnings that cover just about the entire eastern United States. As far south as Florida has wind chill advisories currently, with warnings further inland towards Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and then through just about all of the Great Plains, with some advisories closer to the desert section of Texas. So let's go ahead and move now into satellite. Pretty easy to find our cold front this morning, or this evening, I should say. You can see all these clouds developing out in front of it, where we're seeing some snow falling currently in sections of Missouri, Arkansas, Illinois, and Indiana. And we'll take a look at that here in a second on radar. We can also see all of this rain moving up through the Carolinas. Had some thunder this morning in parts of the Carolinas, even with temperatures just in the 30s in those areas. As another low pressure kind of begins to work its way up the coast here in front of our very powerful cold front. So let's go ahead and take a look at radar now. As you can see, this is that big swath of snow that's extending really as far down south as Oklahoma and working its way all the way up here through the Great Lakes into Chicago, Milwaukee, and working its way into Grand Rapids, Michigan now. This is going to slowly work its way eastward overnight, before eventually getting into the Tennessee and Ohio river valleys as we get into the overnight. Another big story here is all of this rain out here into the eastern United States. Again, we had some thunder this morning here in the Carolinas. That system is now working its way further north and east through the mid-Atlantic, and maybe even some front-end snow going on here into Pennsylvania, New York, and some icing here into the Appalachians, as we talked about with yesterday's video. So let's go and look at current temperatures now. This is a pretty wild map to be looking at. You have sections here of southeastern North Carolina that are actually in the 60s, close to 70 degrees, while most places in Missouri are now getting close or already below 0 degrees. So a very dynamic system and a wide array of temperatures going on across the eastern United States right now. But as you can see, not a mild day by any means, but a pretty temperate day, I guess, going on here across a big section of the South and into the Tennessee River Valley and up through Kentucky into Ohio. Nothing crazy just yet in those areas, but that will quickly change as we go into our overnight. So let's go ahead and look at that now. Let's look at futurecast through all of these areas. This is the latest run of the high resolution rapid refresh. Just came out. In fact, it's still running, but we have enough of the data now that I'll go ahead and show it to you. So here into the Midwest, currently snow falling in sections of Illinois and even down into Missouri and as far north as Wisconsin. This kind of section of snow is going to begin to move eastward as we go through the day. And as we get closer to sunset, areas like Indianapolis, Paducah, Kentucky, and the eastern side of Michigan will begin to see this heavier band of snow move through. You'll likely see some pretty moderate to heavy snow for a little while in most of these areas, which will accumulate pretty quickly to anywhere from 3 to 5 inches is a pretty safe bet in a lot of these areas. And then as we get into the overnight, that will likely move into Ohio before eventually clearing out of the Midwest pretty well. But what's behind this, and you don't see on this map, but we will discuss, are the crazy cold temperatures and wind chills in these areas. A lot of places could be below negative 30 degrees with the wind chill factor included into that, and temperatures below 0 in most of this area. So as that begins to move through tonight, it will then begin to affect kind of the south here and the mid-south into the Ohio River and Tennessee River valleys. we'll go ahead and look at that now as we get into this. Is kind of what radar looks like right now. Again, this line of snow moving through St. Louis and even as far south as sections of Arkansas, and will likely even go through Little Rock in the coming hours. As we get towards sunset, this will likely begin to cross the Mississippi and go into sections of western Kentucky and western Tennessee, then into the central areas of these states. Once again, pretty heavy snow here on the front end, with anywhere from 3 to 5 inches likely in this area, and then likely closer to 1 to 3 here into Tennessee. But you'll also likely see flakes as far south as sections of Mississippi and northern Alabama. Maybe getting a dusting in some of these areas in isolated spots, but more of a novelty thing, seeing the flakes in these areas. As we get closer to midnight, this will likely begin to cross the Appalachian mountain chain, going into North Carolina. The mountains there quickly switching from some rain to a quick burst of snow in a lot of those areas. Shouldn't accumulate to too much, but the highest peaks could see 1 to 3 inches, and maybe even a dusting going into some of the valleys. But mainly the areas that usually get northwest flow in the mountains are more likely to see accumulations. Going into tomorrow morning, this line will continue, and even some leftover snow in Ohio here, and some lake effect enhanced snow in those regions from the winds coming off the lakes there. As this then begins to move through this area, it's going to travel through the mid-Atlantic. All right, so again with the mid-Atlantic, let's go ahead and talk about this first batch of rain that's been moving through this morning. Again, had some stronger storms moving into eastern North Carolina with kind of unstable areas. We talked about temperatures close to 70 there. That is going to begin to move northward into Maryland, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Northern Virginia, and some pretty sections of pretty moderate to heavy rainfall with that batch. You will clear out with that going into the overnight in a lot of these areas from North Carolina to Virginia. So you'll get a bit of a lull before the line then begins to move through, going into daybreak tomorrow, likely crossing Columbia, South Carolina, and then up towards Raleigh, sections of Virginia, this line moving through. Unlikely to see any snow in these areas, just because the cold air is going to be chasing this moisture, and that unfortunately rarely works out for areas east of the Appalachian chain, just because it's a lot of times when the wind comes down the mountain, it's really dry and cold, which helps to kind of dry up that moisture before it can ever change over to snow. But again, going through tomorrow into the early morning hours, moving through sections of Pennsylvania, through Philadelphia, and then eventually into New York City tomorrow afternoon. You'll get that rain, which will then quickly change to bone-chilling temperatures by the afternoon and evening. All right, so as for New England now, we'll go ahead and take a look here. Again, relatively quiet so far this morning in a good section of New England. You'll begin to get some rain move in, maybe a little burst of snow on the front end before quickly changing to rain in most of Massachusetts. I could see the snow hold on a bit longer going into Vermont and New Hampshire, and even parts of upstate New York before changing over to rain. Same story for Maine here, but this rain is going to be heavy at times because you're going to have pretty good enhancement of this moisture coming off of the Atlantic, which is really going to help to keep that rain locked in for a good amount of time here before the front eventually moves through. Again, seeing rain in most of these places at least some point. Burst of snow on the front, which will try to hold on longer in the mountains. But you'll finally get the front to move through going into tomorrow evening in most of these areas. And what we'll likely see here, as modeled by the high resolution rapid refresh, is maybe some snow squalls with the super strong wind coming off of the land and over the Atlantic following this low pressure. Could definitely see some pretty heavy snow squalls here. So maybe a place like Nantucket or here on Cape Cod, if you can get some of these snow squalls to cross over these areas, could easily quickly dump a couple inches of snow in a lot of these areas. Maybe even Long Island might see some flakes fly in New York City tomorrow, and sections of Connecticut and Rhode Island going into tomorrow and tomorrow evening, before that eventually clears out. And the big story after that will be, once again, the super cold temperatures and wind chill. Another thing we have to talk about with these areas is after this moves through, you're going to get some pretty impressive lake effect snow near Buffalo, sections of Erie, Pennsylvania, and even further north into New York State here. All right, and with that, let's go ahead and talk about some of these snowfall totals as all of this moves through. So a lot of areas got their snow already yesterday. Still snowing in areas of St. Louis, which could still see maybe anywhere from 1 to 3 inches. Probably more on the low end of that by the time this video is uploaded. But again, pretty safe bet to see anywhere from 3 to 5 inches here across most of the state of Indiana. Parts of Kentucky here, 1 to 3 inches through most of the state of Kentucky as this begins to move through. And then closer to 1 to 3 inches down here into Tennessee with a dusting the further south you go into northern Mississippi and Alabama. Even a chance to see flakes here in North Georgia. I doubt we see flakes much further east than that just because of how cold the air is, and it's really going to struggle to chase that moisture. Going here into the mountains of North Carolina, again, higher elevations, 1 to 3 inches, closer to a dusting down into the valleys. Could see 3 to 5 inches potentially in the terrain here in West Virginia. I think could definitely get some enhancement from the lake effect the further north you go, and with the help of elevation. Wouldn't be surprised to see if we overperform this just a little bit in those areas. Again, for Ohio, pretty similar to Indiana, 3 to 5 inches, a pretty safe bet through most of the state. Locally higher amounts the further north you go, and lower amounts the further south you go, closer to 1 to 3 inches. And then as for New England, a lot of this is actually going to come on the front end compared to the back end, especially here into Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and sections of New York and up through Maine. So a lot of this will actually melt from the rain before then refreezing as the cold front moves through. And again, as we talked about, if you can get some of these squalls to maybe line up just over Cape Cod or Nantucket, could definitely see some snow accumulating there going into Friday. The big story, though, with this map is look at all of this lake effect going into Michigan, the UP of Michigan, here into Buffalo, these areas. Wouldn't be surprised at all to see a place like Buffalo surpass 3 feet of snow potentially with all this lake effect, because this wind is really going to be whipping in all these areas, and the lakes are still plenty warm enough to help produce a lot of this lake effect. So as for eastern Michigan, again, 1 to 2 feet, isolated spots closer to 30, a safe bet. As for the UP, I think 2 feet is going to be pretty consistent through a lot of the coastal areas here on the upper peninsula of Michigan. Erie, Pennsylvania, maybe about a foot of snow. Could see higher amounts, of course, where those bands set up a little more consistently. And same story here into upstate New York with those areas that receive lake effect. So that is the snow total forecast. Let's go ahead and look at wind gusts now. Again, pretty similar story to what we've been looking at over the past couple of days in terms of the forecast here. As the front moves through, winds will begin to pick up. As you can see here, the winds mainly behind the front. So just kind of look right behind the front is where you'll see the strong winds. And on the front side, slightly calmer before eventually moving through. Right now, in a place like St. Louis, it's not too bad. The winds will begin to pick up, eventually gusting into the 30 to 40 mile an hour range as the cold front really settles in. And this will begin to then slide east. Safe bet to see 30 to 40 mile an hour wind gusts, really from all of Illinois over to Ohio and areas further south into Kentucky and Tennessee. Higher elevations going down into North Carolina. Could see wind gusting as high as maybe 50, 55 miles an hour on the higher peaks. And then that will continue into the other higher terrain up into sections of Maryland, West Virginia. You see some places here getting as high as 60 to 70 mile an hour wind gusts. And then once again, really strong winds here whipping into New England with all that heavy rain as well that will be falling. So definitely have some sideways rain there. And as the slow pressure really cranks up into Canada, look at some of the winds here coming off the lakes. Wouldn't be surprised to see maybe even close to hurricane force over the actual water, and then closer to 50 to 55 mile an hour gusts as you get onto the beaches of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York State. Luckily, these winds will begin to pull into Canada and slowly calm down as we get into Christmas Day, but still pretty gusty here into the Northeast and the Great Lakes region. So the wind, the biggest problem with the wind will be the combination of temperature, which will really help to cause these wind chills to get bitterly cold. But the wind will also cause a lot of power outages in these areas, whether you're receiving snow or rain. That wind is plenty strong enough to bring down some power lines. If you also have any water left over on those power lines from the rain that moves through on the first half, if that's able to freeze, that will only make the wind's job easier in terms of bringing some of those limbs and power lines down. So let's go ahead and look at temperature, and then we'll look at temperature with the wind chill after we look at the actual temperatures. So again, temperatures have plummeted to sub-zero here in sections of Missouri, and this will likely continue going into Indiana and Ohio as we move into the future here. Temperatures as low as, bring this back to about right here. So going into your Christmas Eve morning, temperatures single digits widespread through Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, and then into Pennsylvania, with the mountainous regions seeing sub-zero temperatures in a lot of these areas. And then that will continue to spread into New England going into Christmas morning with plenty of single digits, and then teens further south here into the deep south going into your Christmas. So let's go ahead and look at wind chills now for these areas. So again, whenever you have the winds gusting anywhere from 35 to 40 to 45 mile an hour, you're going to get pretty insane wind chills, as low as close to -50 through a lot of the northern plains. And then this will spread further east, getting into the negative teens as far south as Tennessee. Nashville could be close to -20 degrees with the wind chill factor included. And we can see sub-zero wind chills as far south here as, Atlanta, Georgia, maybe even sections of upstate South Carolina getting close to that. The Charlotte area could definitely get close to that. And I mean, you're looking at single-digit wind chills as far south as near the Florida Panhandle, and even down into Central Florida. You're in the teens at times near the Orlando area with wind chills, and of course, still locked in with those just dangerously cold wind chills into the northern plains, and plenty of sub 15-degree wind chills here across the central eastern part of the country. Luckily, these wind chills will begin to moderate as we go past Christmas and into early next week. The same story with the temperatures, which I'll show you. As we get past Christmas, temperatures will begin to moderate in a lot of these areas, and we'll get back above freezing in most places. So let's go ahead and talk about a little bit after this storm, just to see what we can expect going forward. This is the Euro ensembles for the chance of 1 inch or greater of snow. Could see a little bit of a clipper system move through after the storm. As you can see here, going into next Monday, maybe coming down from Canada into the northern plains, into the Dakotas, before eventually diving south and east into the Tennessee and Ohio River valleys. Unlikely right now that we see any kind of coastal storm out of this, not out of the question, and we'll see if we can trend to it. But right now, models have been pretty consistent on a swath of snow coming through that general area from the northern plains, diving southeast before kind of fizzling out as it hits the Appalachian mountain chain. So that's the next system that we'll likely talk about after this one. Nothing to the degree of the current system we're looking at. But another thing to talk about is the likely warm-up going into New Year's. So this is the 6 to 10-day temperature outlook. So this is going from next Tuesday, the 27th, to New Year's Eve. Likely beginning to warm up here across the central United States and slowly working our way through the eastern United States. And then as we go into New Year's Day through the first week of January, really likely to be above average here through just about the entire country, really, as we begin to moderate from this pattern. And then looking at the precipitation out in this time, likely we continue the wet pattern out west, and I think as we get into the beginning of January, we're likely to see a lot of mountain snow out west with all this precipitation. And then, of course, we'll stay pretty wet in the east, especially into the 8 to 14-day outlook. You can see pretty high probability here of seeing above average precipitation here east of the Mississippi. So that is all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. So we're just got to get through this storm, going through Christmas, and then after that, things should calm down pretty fair amount, but we'll still have plenty to track. So again, that's all I have for today. If you have any questions, feel free to comment, or you can find me on Twitter, Instagram. All my social medias are linked in the description of this video. So hope everyone stays warm the rest of their Thursday, and I will see you all tomorrow.